convicted of murder after a hung jury led to a mistrial. But he was later sentenced to 20 years in prison after he pled guilty to federal charges of violating Scott's civil rights. One factor for the lack of convictions is that prosecutors often have a close working relationship with police, says legal analyst Michelle Goodwin.
Prosecutors may be reluctant then to issue charges against police officers or may not act as zealously in those trials. Take note that in Derek Chauvin's trial, it was not handled as these matters typically are by local prosecutors. Instead, this was turned over to the Attorney General.
Another difference in the George Floyd case was the crumbling of the so-called blue wall of silence as a series of police officers testified against Chauvin.
And I think that's huge. If that continues to happen, the culture of policing will change.
These experts say residents of inner-city communities are over-policed, resulting in too many tragedies.
Yet the police are not equipped to deal with most of the problems that these folks in these communities face. And so we need to reimagine policing and rethink it and frankly transform it.
Social change has only come after people speak out, says another analyst.
And demanding and marching and boycotting buses in Montgomery and marching on Washington and doing all manner of resistance to inequality that demands action.
The day the Minneapolis verdicts were announced, another police shooting in Columbus, Ohio. An officer killed a teenage girl who was seen on video wielding a knife. Critics say police need to follow clear, consistent rules for the use of force across the country. Police say their job is dangerous and that they're asked to do too much without necessary resources, sometimes facing distraught people who need psychiatric help. Amid calls for changes in policing, in Minneapolis there is relief that the judicial system has delivered a measure of justice. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News.
In 2015, protests and riots rocked the mid-Atlantic city of Baltimore, Maryland. This after Freddie Gray, a 25-year-old black man, died of spinal cord injuries sustained while in police custody. 3 of the officers in that case were found not guilty by a jury, and charges were dropped for 3 more officers. At the time of the death in the riots, Stephanie Rawlings Blake was Baltimore's mayor. I asked her about the challenges police face in large cities and in minority communities.
The biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges I would say is the challenge of trust. I often say when it comes to policing, the police and the community are in a marriage. We are in a marriage and there's no possibility of divorce, annulment, or anything. We're in it, and it can be a great relationship or it can be a bad one, but we're in it. And in order to have a great one, you have to have communication and you have to have trust. And right now, there's not a lot of trust between the community and the police. And we have to figure out how to bridge that gap.
Well, it seems like the trust is broken down predominantly, at least what we're seeing is between the races in the country. You know, African Americans and white police officers seems to be a huge problem. Is there any way to build that trust?
Well, I think it's definitely true that there is a challenge when it comes to African Americans and the police department. But I don't think we should ignore the fact that it's not just African Americans. In a lot of poor white communities, that same tension exists. And I think it's about reimagining what policing means in our country, as well as trying to find a path forward for the good officers to help us identify those officers that by their wrongful actions put the good officers in jeopardy and the community in jeopardy. And we have to identify them and we have to get them off the street.
It seems to me it falls in 2 categories in general. One is someone who's indecent, and I don't know how you sort of legislate decency. I mean, that's, very difficult. And the other is sort of a split-second decision in a very dangerous or potentially dangerous position that turns out to be, in hindsight, the wrong decision. How do we go about fighting those challenges?
So, as far as the ones that you're calling indecent, I think we need to do a better job using technology and using other supports to create a path of red flags. We know the set of circumstances that can lead, and sometimes even